Hello, I'm Nigel Griffiths. I work in the Advanced Technology Centre in the UK, part of IBM Europe. In this third IVM movie, we're going to create our first logical partition. Let's create our first logical partition. We're at the default panel here, view modify partitions, and the obvious thing to do is to hit the create partition button. Now I'll just slide that down a little bit so we can see the details of the panel. We have a wizard here that will take us through the various things, memory, processors, storage, etc. And let's create our first logical partition. We have to give it a name. It's going to give it an ID of 2. The ID 1 is taken up by IVM itself. So once we've finished our panel, we hit next and we can move on, this time to memory. We have 16 gigabytes of memory in the machine and just over 14 gigabytes is free. So let's change this to gigabytes and let's give ourselves 4 gigabytes. Next we're going to decide the processing power we want. We could limit this logical partition to 1 CPU, but we might as well let it spread out to 4 CPUs. Then we have an option of shared or dedicated. Now if it is dedicated, that CPU is 100% dedicated to the logical partition. In that case, we couldn't have 4 in here because that would be the whole machine, and IVM needs some power and some other logical partitions need power, so maybe we would just say 1 or 2 CPUs would be allocated to the dedicated partition. The advantage though of using shared is that if we allocate, say, half a CPU to this logical partition, if it doesn't use all its entitlement, then that CPU cycles can be given to another logical partition to boost its performance. And if we're uncapped, then this logical partition, if it uses up all its entitlement and there's spare CPU not being used by a logical partition, or if there's just generally spare CPU not allocated at all, then our logical partition can get a performance boost by borrowing those CPUs. So tend to recommend shared for performance. Now we're looking at the Ethernet, and we have an example here of we can either do our network connection using the hardware or the software. At the bottom here we have the virtual Ethernet that we set up. Each logical partition has access to 2 of the 4 virtual Ethernets, and we can see by default here the first one has been pre-selected for us to pick up that virtual Ethernet that is bridged by the IVM VIO server out to the physical network. Up here though we have an alternative where we could use the host Ethernet adapter ports. So this is the Ethernet built into the machine. We have a 4-port example, there's also a 2-port, but in this case we got 4, and it's pre-selected that this one is in state up, so it's actually got a connection in the back, and we could connect to that and be one of the 14 available ports, virtual ports, that 14 different logical partitions could actually access their network via this HEA. Now in this case I want to use the virtual Ethernet via our IVM VIO server, so I'll deselect that, so our network will be this one here. Next we want to allocate some storage space. We haven't already allocated virtual storage, so we're going to have to create one for this new first logical partition. By default it's going to be called LP2, Logical Partition 2, Virtual Disk 1, which makes sense. We could change that if we wanted to. The default storage pool, as we already set up, is my pool. We can see that there's 270 gigabytes of disk space available to us. Let's again change that to gigabytes and give ourselves, say, 16 gigabytes of space here. Then we can also connect immediately our DVD-ROM drive that's in the machine, or we could connect a virtual optical device. We'll look at those things later on. We can not have these at the moment. We'll connect those up when we actually do a installation of our operating system, where we can see how to do that, not at this stage. Then we have a summary here We can check our details. If we had prepared, perhaps in a spreadsheet, all our details for lots and lots of logical partitions, we could actually check that we got the expected numbers in here before we actually go forward. We just click Finish to actually create our logical partition. And it really is that easy. This is why I like the IVM way of making logical partitions and controlling our virtual devices. So here is our first client logical partition. It's not activated at the moment. We'll do that in the next movie. We've given it 4 gigabytes of memory. We've given it 4 CPUs, and it's entitled to 0.4 of a CPU. We could change that if we wanted to. If we wanted to make changes to any of these things, we could click on the name here of our logical partition. Again, I'll slide that down a bit so we can see everything. And we have much the same things as we've connected for when we actually created it here. So here's its name. We can look at the memory. It filled this in. We've assigned 4 gigabytes of memory in here. These are the ranges we can do dynamic memory changes across. Processing power, we got 0.4. Perhaps we'd like to change that so this logical partition has 1.5 CPUs worth of power assigned to it as its entitlement, its guarantee. We can look at the Ethernet connections as we set up the storage, as we set up, and the optical devices, we didn't set those up, but they're there. We also have physical adapters, but we'll look at that at a later stage. If I just slide down here, we can OK that so that it will take my change to the entitlement here. In the next movie, we'll start this up and install an operating system.